The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm James Thompson, Senior Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. With me today, as always, is my Chanticleer colleague. He's never writing cheques that his beautiful mind can't cash. It's Anthony McDonald. How are you, Anthony?
Great, James. Can't remember the last time I wrote a cheque, but very happy. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, this week we ask how the banks can help the housing crisis. We look at whether the big supermarket inquiry will really change anything and check in on our favourite entrepreneurial bad boys. Anthony, let's start there. This week the focus was back on the scandal-plagued Richard White at WiseTech and Chris Ellison at Mineral Resources. One seems to have come through the fire and the other is still very much in the frying pan. Let's start with Richard. A review into his conduct found he misled the board, he failed to deal with conflicts of interest, he exceeded his authority as CEO, but he's still got a job. Anthony, tell us a little bit about how he's managed to pull off that feat.
It's amazing the power that comes with a 40% stake, isn't it, James?
Yes, indeed.
And a long track record of making lots of money for your investors, who include your fellow board members. It's amazing, James. This whole scandal around WiseTech, if anything, it just seems to have cemented the power of Richard White at that company. If you take a 6-month view, his position at the company's only gone up, despite everything that's come out. He's got more control over that company since he's had since it listed nearly a decade ago now. And he's clinging to that top job. What did you make of the findings from the law firm, James, that sort of delved through some of the allegations?
Oh, I mean, I thought they were pretty straight up and down, really. Pretty damning. Richard's had issues with the personal relationships that he's had and how they've been disclosed to the board. It's pretty clear. But I think the board's attitude in the end was he's a very naughty boy, but he's our very naughty boy. Yeah. He's so important to this company, we're going to keep him. And, of course, White's attitude is, hey, look, I'm happy to be the executive chairman. I thought the really interesting thing, Anthony, was that the WiseTech board said they'd done a survey of their investors. Now, clearly, the survey had come back and said, please keep Richard White.
Yeah, definitely.
We're willing to look past these governance issues. So, in a way, from whatever happens from here, and I think there's still water to flow under the bridge, the investors have to live with their decision, don't they?
Absolutely. They've told the board that, and the board's done it. Now, good luck to them for the next few years.
Yeah. And tell us about Chris Ellison. I think the last time we left him, he was struggling to deal with a vital road, which runs out to his iron ore mine, which just happened to wash away in the recent cyclone, despite the thing only being finished last year. What's happened now there?
James, well, news around that road got worse.
Really?
You might remember this. So it's a 150-kilometre private road that, like you said, it transports ore from the Onslow mine, this brand new mine they've built, and helps it get to port. Now, James, the road was closed this week by WorkSafe WA after an accident by one of these giant trucks that runs up and down it. No one died, no one was injured, but there's a bit of strife on this road. Clearly, at best it's suffering teething problems. At worst, it's a real bottleneck for this Onslow supply chain. Now, why it matters, James, though, is because Mineral Resources has gone all in on this new iron ore mine, Onslow.
Yep.
It leveraged up the balance sheet to build it. And what it's built, I'm sure, is fantastically expensive infrastructure. Maybe just put the road to one side. And now it needs those cash flows from Onslow to start coming through, James, so it can pay down its whopping $5 billion net debt pile. So its net debt is worth 5 times its earnings from 2024. Like that's a lot. That's sort of nosebleed territory in the Australian market.
Absolutely.
Now, MinRes owns 60% of the ore at Onslow. It has a big mining services contract to actually do the mining. It collects money when that whole road is used. So it's got a lot riding on it. It needs all of that stuff to start coming in so that it can get more cash, right, and start paying down that debt. Now, those close to the company say, don't worry, MinRes is still getting all its shipments to China for now, and that's what brings in the money. Yep. But this Onslow project is supposed to be running at full capacity, 35 million tonnes a year, by the September quarter this year, James. So it really needs to get this road working. Now, in the background, there's this really vicious game going on, this sort of capital markets game where you've got the doubters, those that think MinRes's balance sheet is overstretched, which I think, I mean, you can take it as fact that it is, but they won't have the cash flow to pay down that debt as it falls due in coming years. And then you have the bulls, which includes MinRes itself, who says, don't worry, we're sweet. Even if the iron ore price drops, we'll be able to get our way through this. So MinRes is trying to stare down the doubters and ride it out, James. I mean, that's a strategy that can work. The problem is these teething problems at Onslow just shifts sand from under its feet in terms of credibility, right? Like every time they come out and say there's no problems, but then they have these teething problems at Onslow, it just makes it all harder. So they're not out of the woods yet.
And so, Anthony, tell us, the road was shut down temporarily. This road's supposed to have 5 trucks going down it every 5 minutes. Is the thing open yet?
I don't think so.
Wow. Do we need to get over there with the Chanticleer graders and the diggers and help Chris out? Is that the way to go?
Well, yeah, they can get you on the steamroller, James, because remember they're asphalting it. I think that's a $250 million job that's taking place in the next 6 months. It sounds diabolical. I mean, MinRes and Chris Ellison himself says, don't worry, this is all just part of opening up a new mine and a new project. But, I mean, for the rest of us, it sounds like there's some very, very simple things that just aren't going on here.
One to keep watching.
Okay, James, speaking of what you're watching, you've been watching markets like a hawk this week, but I'm happy to report there's been a bit of a bounce on both the ASX 200 and Wall Street. So can we sound the all clear?
Well, Anthony, when all you've got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're a bear, everything looks like a pot of honey. And I'm staying bearish. I still don't like what I see out there. I think there are some massive changes that Donald Trump is bringing through markets. Investors are still trying to get their heads around them, and we're not through this shakeout yet. We're not through this readjustment. I mean, just this week, on Tuesday night, we saw Germany vote to release their debt handbrake, which has been in place, for years. So basically, they're going to spend whatever it takes to rearm. Now, just think about that. 3 months ago, that idea was completely off the wall. And now Germany is going to spend hundreds of billions, possibly trillions of dollars rearming. Do you think that's been priced into markets yet? I don't. This week we had the Federal Reserve in the US. US's equivalent of the RBA. They kept rates on hold. Basically, they said, we have got absolutely no idea where the economy is going. We don't know what these tariffs are going to do. Notionally, the tariffs will hit growth and they'll push inflation up. But we don't really know. Do you think that's been priced into markets yet? I don't. And remember, we haven't even got to April 1, where Donald Trump's supposed to announce reciprocal tariffs on the entire world. So I think it's nice to have had a bounce. We've had a few green days on markets where the market's gone up. That's all good. A bit of stability never goes astray. But I just think we can't sound the all clear yet. There's just so many moving pieces moving so quickly that investors need to be pretty cautious about what's ahead. Am I going too far? Too much doom and gloom?
I agree with you, James, that we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, when the Federal Reserve basically, they just came out and did what everyone else has done, just chipped a little bit off the economic growth forecast for the US, think that we're in a lower growth, higher inflation environment. But James, their crystal ball's only as good as the rest of ours, right? They don't know what's going to happen. And they pretty much came out and said that. So I think this uncertainty, it's just going to feed off itself for a while. So whether it's good times, bad times, or what out there, just the fact that everyone's sitting around talking about uncertainty, everything's going to take a bit of a pause. And that means that, if economic growth really is 1.7% in the US this year, James, that's historically a tough time for equities, right? Equities do well when growth is 2% or more. When equities do well, we all tend to feel better about the world. That's when boards feel better about their companies, when investors feel better about their companies, and that sort of momentum feeds off itself as well. But at the moment, we're stuck with this uncertainty sort of mindset, and probably see us, muddle around for a bit.
Absolutely. Okay, Anthony, let's move to our first topic. And this week, the AFR hosted its annual banking summit in Sydney. We had some great speakers. There was Commonwealth Bank boss and Chanticleer superfan, Matt Common. We had the NAB CEO, Andrew Irvine, there, and both of them were actually pretty worried about what Donald Trump's tariff policies might mean for Australia, not just over the next few months, but actually over the next few years. But, of course, it didn't take long, because it never does, for the discussion to turn to housing and the housing affordability crisis. And it was Jonathan Mott, the veteran banking analyst from Barrenjoey, who silenced the room with some of his comments. Let's take you inside the summit and hear what he had to say.
Over the last 3 years since we started seeing rates go up, the lending to owner-occupiers who earn less than $120,000 per year, which is 60% of society, has fallen 66%. Only 8% of credit that the banks lend goes to owner-occupiers earning less than 120 grand. Now, at the same time, you look at it and say, well, lending to investors earning more than $500,000 per annum is up 166% and is now 9%. So the 1% of society who are investors are getting more credit than the 60% who are owner-occupiers. Now, is that the right number? If this doesn't change and you live in Sydney, you'll never know your grandkids because they won't be able to afford a house in Sydney. They won't live here.
Talk about bears, Anthony. That's quite the image, isn't it? Our grandkids will never be able to live close to us because their parents, our kids, will simply be priced out of the market. It's a pretty sort of sad and frightening and confronting and striking idea. But you think about it and you go, I get where he's coming from.
Yeah, it's a shocking thought, James, isn't it? I mean, such a simple one, but not something that anybody really wants in their future. But perhaps that's the way we're headed. The median house price in Sydney was $1.6 million last year, James. The median property price, which includes units, was 1.2 mil. That's a lot. In Melbourne, the median property price, 770 grand. Brisbane, it's 900. Perth, 800. Like it's a lot, right? And as Jonathan Mott points out, everyday people with, hard working, very honest jobs that might be earning 120K or less, they're just not getting the credit to get into the property market. And this whole thing is headed in the wrong direction just for the country. Now, James, obviously not everyone wants to live in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, where the house prices are more expensive.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the bulk of Australians do live in those cities. And the way we're headed, they're going to live in the bulk in those cities in 30, 40, 50 years' time. So where are they going to live? If they can't buy a house, they're going to rent. And that's okay for some people. But for a lot of people and for Australia, a lot of our success is on the back of ordinary people's ability to buy a house and build their wealth that way. And James, we've spoken a lot about on the podcast. The problem's obviously the housing supply. The government loves throwing lollies around like first home buyer grants to stimulate the demand, but housing supply is running way behind. And now they're trying to fix it with policies to come out and build these 1.2 million new houses in the next 4 or 5 years. But it's bloody expensive to build. Our cities are reasonably built.
Yeah.
It's not like there's huge parcels of unused land just lying around, and those targets are looking more and more aspirational. But going back to Jonathan Mott's point, my kids, when they grow up, I definitely want them to be able to buy a house just like my parents would have wanted me and my siblings to buy one. And it'd be even better if they're within, close enough distance you can see them every week or two.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really sort of confronting idea. In a way, Jonathan Mott's not saying anything new, but just that idea of intergenerational anguish this is now going to cause, it's really something to think about. And you sort of think, how do we get here?
Now, James, we usually do questions at the end of the podcast, but I want to bring one in early today. It's from Alicia from Clear Mountain, Queensland, who asks,
given Australia's housing crisis, why do you think that federal action has been more incremental than transformative? Policies like first home grants and building incentives haven't resolved the supply-demand imbalance. I'm also curious about how well-meaning policies like negative gearing, the NDIS and My Aged Care might unintentionally worsen housing pressures by driving up prices or keeping larger homes occupied by fewer people while families struggle to find housing close to city centres. Could these interconnected issues be addressed more holistically? And do you think that either of the major parties has the political will for true transformative housing reforms in the coming election? Thanks for considering my question. I look forward to your thoughts. Alicia from Clear Mountain in Queensland.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And I think Alicia's hit the nail on the head here. The reason we're sort of getting this hodgepodge approach, lots of different things thrown at the wall to try and hopefully crack open housing supply or change the affordability equation, is because it's really, really hard. But, it's easy to blame governments and politicians, and goodness knows we've done enough of it. But One thing that Jonathan Mott also brought up was how we've approached banking and how that might have made a difference. And this is maybe something else for Alicia to think of. So after the GFC, we wanted to make the banks, unquestionably strong, safe, secure. And so what we did is we changed what's called the risk weights. So banks were able to hold less capital against mortgages because, a house is an easy asset to sell, and they had to hold more capital against business loans and that sort of lending. So in other words, the banks were incentivized to write more mortgages because that was regarded as being safer. And so what do you reckon the banks have done?
Yeah.
They've written mortgages like there's no tomorrow because they get a better return on capital for that. They get more profit. They are able to deliver bigger returns to shareholders. But, and this is the point Mott made, what have we given up by making the system safer and secure, more secure? What we've done is we've incentivized one area of the economy to go gangbusters at the expense of all the other areas of the economy. And then we have this hodgepodge of policies on top of that, which try and address, reverse the tide a little bit. So this is a really complex thing. And I think the point that Jonathan Mott was really making is we have made choices as a society. We have made the choice that we want banks to be really safe, really secure, but we don't want them to take that much risk. And so they go into the easiest, best returning, most profitable thing to lend against, and that's houses. And look where we get. I mean, Anthony, what do you think of Alicia's point that is there someone who's got the silver bullet here? I can't see a silver bullet. If it was easy, we would have found a way to do it. Do we just have to struggle through this for a while and hope it resolves itself?
We need things like those 5-year plans and actually stick to them, James. But problem is by the end of that 5-year plan, we could have 2 new governments by then, So
True.
That's the problem with the 3-year election cycles. But in terms of Alicia's question, there's structural issues about like housing versus aged care. I really do wonder about that one, James. Like if the aged care policy is directed towards home care, right, to take the pressures off the aged care system, where it's hard to attract and retain staff, it's hard on the government budget. If you keep the oldies in their homes longer, it's good for the aged care system. But obviously, that's one less home for a young person or a young family to occupy, and it sort of stuffs up the whole recycling that's needed for the housing market, but also for the way our society works, right? For everyone to get the chance to have a go. And I mean, chuck stamp duty on top of that as well, James. Like that's a huge deterrent to downsizing. So we've got all these baby boomers in their homes. Remember, they've never paid $1 million for a place before. They've never paid a $50,000 stamp duty bill or a $100,000 stamp duty bill, and that really freaks them out. So they're sitting in their homes. They look at these sorts of costs that they'd have to pay in order to get it moving and keep this social contract of the housing market going, and they just don't want to pay it. So the whole thing's just constipated. And I mean, Alicia says, like, could we get some policy or movement here in time for the next election? I mean, if Alicia, if you're talking about the election that's in 2 months, I mean, like, no way. Like, there is nothing. Unfortunately, it's really hard to see anything coming that's really going to move the needle. There's just too many homeowners out there, right? Any uncertainty about house prices, you shock people ahead of an election, between now and the election, it would just get absolutely run over. But there will come a point, James, I really think, where young people, immigrants, people are locked out of the housing market. They will literally be rioting on the streets if we don't get this right. And it's up to the current generation of politicians, of homeowners, to say, all right, well, if we don't help right this wrong, it's going to get done for us in a generation or two's time, and we're going to lose out. So it's in everyone's interest to sort of get the flow working better.
Yeah, well, we all sort of look at what's happening in America and say, oh, isn't populism bad? But this is how populism gets bred, by people feeling like they are locked out of the society. Anthony, one of the other points that John Mott made was that back in the 1980s, roughly 2/3 of all credit in the country went to businesses and 1/3 went to mortgages. That's now roughly flipped. So 2/3 goes to mortgages, 1/3 to business. He made the point that we're all whinging all the time about productivity. Well, guess who drives productivity? Businesses, and particularly young and innovative businesses. It's another example, isn't it, of that sort of circularity that we've created with policy.
100%. And that's why it sort of comes back to your sort of theory that you're working on, James, about housing, sort of the housing problem eating up the economy and just taking up all this potential space for productivity. And Australian Super CEO Paul Schroeder, I mean, he kind of made the same point about the capital at our business summit earlier this month, albeit in a slightly different way. But he said, we have way too much capital tied up in housing, and that's capital that of yours and mine, James. But more importantly, it's the capital of the banks. And like the problem is you starve other people that need that capital. The mortgages are great, safe investments. And like you said, James, the regulators encourage the big four banks to go that way, and they've massively reined in risk. But because you're doing that, you're keeping capital out of the hands of investment that could actually help, productivity, and not just lock it up in bricks that are in the ground and not going anywhere, and seeing wealth rise just based on paper, but make it all sort of unsustainable. So I mean, that's why, to Schroeder's point and Mott's point, that's why we have this debate around superannuation funds and their huge pools of capital, and is there some way to release some of that into the economy in a way that could help get business firing, whether that is taking some of the capital that's in the housing market so the banks can get back into doing what they do, and that's, write loans to business, whether that's private credit and lending to get more of the capital into the system. It looks to be sort of what's missing. Now, James, like you said, the rules around capital, they're supposed to make the banking sector more stable and secure. But do you think we've got the wrong outcome here when you think about housing and productivity? I mean, has it all gone a bit too far?
It's tough, isn't it? Whenever there's a crisis, the GFC is a great example. Even a couple of years ago when we had Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse go under, there's nothing Australian regulators and politicians love to say more than how safe is the Australian banking system?
Yeah.
What a pillar of our society. So, but I think the recognition that there is a cost to that we shouldn't want to make the pendulum go much further or any further, I think that's important. I mean, we had APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, at the summit, and they're not talking about taking the handbrake off. They're talking about new governance rules to make the sector even more safe, the standards of governance accountability even stronger. This is sort of tightening their grip, the regulatory grip on the sector, I would argue. So I guess that's the question. Directionally, we're still heading down the path of making banking more safe and secure, and I think it's right to ask, are the outcomes that we've got, so unaffordable housing and crappy productivity growth, are they really what we want? And I think the answer is no. So do we have to look at the balance of regulation? I think the answer is yes, but I don't see much evidence of that conversation. I think APRA's going in the other direction.
All right, James, for our second topic, let's think about the weekly shop. The government finally released the Competition Regulator's Supermarkets Inquiry on Friday morning, which was a succinct 441-page report that studied and summarised supermarkets' power, pricing, supplier relationships, margins, profitability, and our supermarkets are pretty profitable, promotions and loyalty programs, and everything else competition in the sector. James, the report made 20 recommendations, including greater transparency on wholesale pricing, stronger complaints handling mechanisms, and potentially government support for community-owned stores in remote areas. James, that 441 pages, it was a lot. I mean, 20 recommendations, that's a fair few. But amid it all, one line caught my eye, and it's one the Treasurer even used in his press release. There's no silver bullets to fix the issues. So while there's a lot of work in the report, 441 pages of work, would you agree that there's not actually a lot of call to action here? Like it didn't read to me like much is going to change at all.
Anthony, the shopping trolley, it's bolted. It bolted years ago.
Yeah.
The ACCC's tried to come up with some ideas to sort of put the clamps on Coles and Woolies, particularly Aldi and Metcash, which run the IGA chain to a lesser extent. But the die's been cast. Coles and Woolies have already got almost 80% of the market. They're not going to give up any stores.
Yeah.
Neither Aldi or IGA are coming out to open a whole lot of new stores to increase competition because it's not economic to do so. They don't want to be in regional areas or Tassie or Darwin where you don't make a whole lot of money and you spend a whole lot of money. So nothing much is going to change. I think the ACCC even says it. There's no change to the supermarket power dynamics in the foreseeable future. So was this a big waste of time? I'm not sure. I mean, Anthony, one of the things they want to do is encourage competition. Do you think it's feasible that we can get a 4th or 5th or 6th supermarket chain in Australia going up against the big guys?
Not really, James. I mean, it's a concentrated market. The report made that pretty clear. But it's actually a big market too. In the context of Australian spending, I think they said that 85% of Australians get their groceries from supermarkets. So like supermarkets have a really big hold of us. Woolworths has the biggest chunk of that. They've got 38% of supermarket sales. Coles has 29%, Aldi 9%, and the Metcash supplied stores, so your IGAs, that's 7%. So between those four, you've got pretty much the whole market covered. But if you look at the way it's sort of changed in the past 20 years, James, there's not been great change. I mean, like Aldi coming in was the big one. It's tripled its stores in the past 15 years to nearly 600, but it's still only 9% of the market. Like it's not game-changing stuff. That's because the barriers to entry are so high. Like it is so high. If you wanted to come here, James, and start up from scratch, you're dealing with a few problems. First of all, you have to get across all the suppliers, right? That's renegotiate agreements with hundreds of suppliers and try to get better or as good terms as Coles and Woolworths. Good luck. You've got economies of scale. Coles and Woolworths have got, 38% and 29% of the market already. They're so embedded. You're taking on a couple of monsters with, so 2/3 of the market between them. They've got the distribution sorted. They've got the transport and trucking and all that stuff. We have a big, sparsely populated country. How are you going to compete? And then you've got the land problem as well. James, you can't just go and set up a supermarket anywhere. You need a big space. You need it to be where the population is. You need the car parks, all that stuff. All that just means it's so hard for anyone to come here and turn that on its head, James. So, I mean, the ACCC, like you said, I mean, they basically say it's really hard to see any outbreak of competition from a new entrant because of these barriers to entry. So it looks like we're kind of stuck with what we've got. And the ACCC, I don't know if you saw this one, James, they did like an interesting case study of when Europe's Kaufland tried to come here, and it went through the competitive response by Coles, and Coles did exactly what you'd expect it to do. You know, it looked at where these new stores were going to open, it upgraded its own stores in the area, you know, put its elbows out, and it did what a rational company's supposed to do. So, I mean, you know, the ACCC went through Aldi as well and Amazon and their expansion. But basically, I don't think they found anything that's going to change the game for us. If you look at the guts of the recommendations, though, James, there was a lot of mention of transparency. You know, transparency on wholesale pricing, transparency on fresh produce pricing, transparency on discounts and promotions and loyalty programs, all that stuff. Do you think we need more transparency?
Oh, look, I guess you can't have too much, but it's interesting. I mean, the idea here is that Coles and Woolies will have to be more upfront about the way they discount, more upfront about their loyalty programs, more upfront about promotions and how that works, more upfront with suppliers about the rebates that they pay and how those rebates are used. The interesting one for me, they're going to, if the recommendations go through, they're going to need to provide more data on wholesale prices that they pay to fresh food producers, so farmers. So every week, apparently, we're going to be able to look at what the average wholesale price Coles has paid for beef or beans or beetroot. I mean, that's sort of interesting in a way, because you'll be able to say, okay, well, Coles paid $5 a kilo for beef at the farm gate, and they're charging me $12 on the supermarket. I'm plucking these numbers, of course. So you might go, oh, hang on, what's happened there? But Coles and Woolies are just going to say, okay, well, yeah, we've got to transport that. We've got to process it. We've got to package it. We've got to chill it. We've got to pay the rent on our stores. We've got to pay the staff in the stores. We've got to do all this stuff. And that's how you get to the prices. Now, here's an interesting one for you, Anthony. We all love $1.50 litre of milk, right? We love it when milk costs $1.50. So if you're a consumer out there monitoring the Coles and Woolies weekly pricing of milk, are you cheering for wholesale prices to go up to help the farmer or to go down to help you? I don't quite know. Someone's got to pay for this.
Yeah.
So it's the transparency is good and it'll change the dynamics, but there might be some unintended consequences. People might say some of these prices. They might say, oh, well, I don't want to pay $5 a kilo for X. I think it should be $4.50 at the wholesale level, and that saving should be passed on to me. So maybe there's a bit of be careful what you wish for here, but it's going to be interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah, Jabs, I think the other thing that came up through this report, I mean, it wasn't the purpose of the report, but it really underscores Michelle Bullock's point and Philip Lowe's point before them, just about the power of inflation and how bad inflation is for ordinary Australians. Like, you look at the input costs that increased in supermarkets, you know, fuel and energy, labour, capital, production costs such as fertiliser, seed, freight, all that sort of stuff that goes into the cost of getting a good onto the supermarket shelf. The price of all that stuff went up. So, of course, supermarket prices go through the roof and wages just can't keep up. And that's when Australians' living standards go backwards. You need productivity to bridge that gap. There hasn't been much at all. And so we all feel worse off.
Yeah. Coles, Woolies, IGA, Aldi, they're all the focus of this report. Do you think any of them come out looking better or worse than the others?
It was like blankets over the big two, I reckon, James. Like, it basically just looked at Woolworths versus Coles, their pricing strategies, the way they sort of go at it together, you know, because they're the two big dominant ones with 2/3 of the market. But ACCC says they've got limited incentive to compete vigorously on price because this is a pretty rational oligopoly. There's place for both of them. They have the same suppliers, often the same customers. They've both got big, profitable businesses, the same sorts of investors. So the ACCC says they don't really have that much incentive to go at it, basically. There's no price war between them. They roll through the same sorts of specials, and Aldi's kind of the one that keeps them a bit more honest on price. Now, James, if you asked Leah Weckett, the Coles boss, or Amanda Bardwell, the Woolworths boss, if that's the case, I doubt they'd say it is, right? Every time we hear from them, they seem to say that shoppers are now more discerning, making price-based decisions, all that sort of stuff. But this report paints an industry with two dominant players, an aggressively priced player, but basically an oligopoly that's working pretty well for everyone involved in terms of the retailers themselves and their shareholders. And not much is going to change. But James, as much as I'd love to say that Coles is going better than Woolworths or Woolworths is going better than Coles on this front, I thought they were just similar. One thing that did catch my eye, though, people might find interesting, James.
Yep.
Did you see those charts about how important promotions are to their sales? So at Coles, only 48% of Coles' sales are on no promotion items. So more than half of their sales are things that are on promotion. 30% are on specials, 16% of those longer term down sort of promotions. At Woolworths, it was very, very similar. So 51% of their sales are on no promotion goods. So these promotions are such a big driver of their revenue. I didn't realise it was that strong.
Australians love a bargain, Anthony, and they'll keep hunting. All right, Anthony, we'll come back after the break and preview Christmas Day for economists. All right, welcome back. If you want to know more about what we're talking about today and a whole lot more, AFR subscribers can sign up to the Chanticleer newsletter at join.afr.com/Chanticleer. Every Saturday morning, the newsletter pulls together the best Chanticleer columns from the week and delivers them straight to your inbox. Anthony, I'm off to Canberra on Tuesday for the federal budget. This is the federal budget that the federal government didn't really want to deliver. And Treasurer Jim Chalmers and our political guru at the Fin, Phil Coorey, have sort of said, look, there's not going to be much in this because we're so close to the election.
Should be a good trip to Canberra then, James.
Thank you. Always nice to be in Canberra in autumn. Yeah, no, look, it'll set the scene, set the stage for the official start of the election campaign, perhaps. So we'll see what goodies Jim and Albo have locked away in there. On Wednesday, we get monthly inflation data. It'd be a good little update for the Reserve Bank. And on Monday, prior to the opening of the share market, we get some changes to the ASX indices. Anthony, can you quickly take us through these?
Yeah, so every quarter, the Standard & Poor's, who run the index or the indices, they look at the companies that have got bigger and smaller and they make a few changes. So this quarter, James, we've got a few big additions in the ASX 50, which are the top 50 stocks. So Sigma Healthcare is coming in and Pro Medicus. And on the outside, we're losing Ramsay Healthcare and Mineral Resources. Now, James, these are just stock names, but these things really interest me because it shows you who's winning the share market game. It shows you who's sort of winning in Australian business, right? So we've got two businesses going up. We've got one capital light software company that's targeting America that's not grown into its big boots yet, but has lots of potential. And then the other one we've got is Chemist Sigma, which just bought Chemist Warehouse, and it's going into the 50 because the Chemist Warehouse owners have finally put their business onto the ASX. And coming out, James, you've got Ramsay and Mineral Resources, and they're both two big, important Australian businesses with big labour forces battling away in sort of harder industries. So it really piques my interest as to just to see, like from a high level, what's going up and what's going down. Yeah,
absolutely. No, good call. All right. Well, we love questions on the podcast. We had our question earlier from Alicia from Clear Mountain. If you've got a question you want to send in, you can email us at chanticleer@afr.com. You can also send us a question in audio form. Just record a voice memo on your phone, include your name and where you're from, and email it to us. Anthony, another big week, and we'll dive into the federal budget next week and get our heads around that too.
Enjoy shaking some hands down in Canberra, James, and please represent the Chook Pod and all of our listeners beautifully at the budget next week.
I shall. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing or giving the podcast a review, as it helps other listeners find us. And don't forget to follow wherever you get your podcasts. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com and you can subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. Chanticleer was hosted by me, James Thompson and Anthony McDonald, and it was produced by Alex Gow and Lap Fan. Our theme is by Alex Gow, head of podcast is Lap Fan, and the head of premium content is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.